Welcome to The One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. I'm excited that you and all of your parts have taken time to be with me and all of my parts. If you are a coach, a client, a therapist, if you are in business or education, and you're curious about the IFS model, you are in the right place. Now, let's see what happens on today's podcast. Hey everyone. I hope you're doing well. It is summer in New Hampshire, so I'm doing very well. I spent the day at the beach, so I was tan and wearing a tank top when Michelle and I met. Hence her comment at the beginning that it must be warm where I am. We spoke for over 2 hours, so I split this up into 2 episodes. The first one is a lot of details about the tools found in Michelle's book, Daily Parts Meditation Practice. These tools really help give a system for different ways of tracking, containing, and holding your parts. The second episode slows us down a bit with a 10-minute meditation where Michelle leads us through this experience. Michelle also is involved in the foundation, which goal is IFS research and spreading IFS in other arenas. Right now they're talking about schools, and there's some really cool stuff, so you definitely want to listen. I'll outline the benefits of the daily parts meditation practice, which are seen throughout these episodes, but I'll clarify that a little bit. I did want to talk about what burdened parts and unburdened parts mean, because these are terms that are used throughout our conversation. So I thought I would clarify a little bit as much as I can. So what I decided, I had to check with my parts because I felt like there was a part of me that wanted to give you an intellectual understanding. And then there's another part that was like, that's just not feeling right. So what I decided was that I would tell you about my experience of the unburdening that I mentioned in this episode. If you have questions about what I'm about to say, or obviously about anything included in this episode or any other episodes, drop me a note on the Facebook page, and I'm happy to talk more about it. So I noticed during a training last year that I needed to put all my stuff away from others, and I needed to put it in this neat pile. A friend pointed out and said to me, you need to make sure that you have a place. And I noticed immediately that I began to tear up when she said this. So in IFS, we would call that a trailhead. There's clearly something that's been triggered. There's some feelings, something's been touched. And we would say, okay, there's a part there that needs some attention. I went to my therapist and I said, okay, this is a part that is up, and I still have some feelings about it, and I'm really curious about it. And as I began to talk about that part, for some reason, I started talking about how I tend to move and talk and think really fast. And that seemed to be related in some way. And so as we're talking about that and we're doing what we do in IFS is where I'm asking parts to step back, and there's more self energy there. And okay, so I've decided I'm not going to tell you that part. I'm going to tell you about my experience. Okay, there's a part of me that wants to tell you about the IFS protocol that was underneath of this experience. But I decided I'm just going to tell you my experience. Okay. I begin to talk about these two things, this not belonging and needing a place and not belonging. Those kind of went hand in hand, and then talking really fast. And all of a sudden I started talking about transitions in my life around 4th and 5th grade. There was a lot of transitions. My mom got married. I moved to a new school. A lot of things happened in that time. And so as I'm talking about that, then it started making sense. Okay, there is this young, fearful part who is about 9 years old, and she doesn't feel like she has a place to belong. And what I kept hearing her say is, the ground has fallen out. The ground has fallen out. And I thought, that's not the right phrase. The phrase is, the bottom's fallen out, right? That's the phrase that's used, but she kept saying the ground has fallen out. So, okay, that's fine. So I guess there's a part of me that's like, why is she saying that? That's not the right phrase. But she kept saying this. So I just kept trying to be with her with compassion and an open heart. She appeared to me as this cartoon character, which I think I mentioned in this episode. It was like a triangle, female cartoon. She was kind of pinkish. And then I noticed she, kind of where is she in time and place? And she looks like she's in this big warehouse. It's this dark warehouse. And it's here where I'm being with her. And I'm just letting her know that I'm curious and compassionate. And I have an open heart towards her. And she begins to tell me about some details about this time that are really upsetting, and there's a lot of shame there and a lot of fear. So she starts telling me these things, and she says that she feels like she was dropped. She was dropped because of these things that were happening in her life, but she was dropped into this warehouse. And I thought, okay, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And I sort of look up and I see that there's this hole in this warehouse, and there's sort of sun shining through this hole. And I could see that she has this feeling of being dropped into this warehouse, just like she was dropped in the middle of these, many transitions. She has this feeling of being dropped. Okay, so I let her know that makes lots of sense, and I'm just continuing to be with her. In IFS, we call this process the witnessing process, and I started to call it, and I'm sure I've heard this from somewhere, but I start calling it the withness. I'm with her as she's telling me this. So there's this withness that I just love that term. So that's sort of this experience of me being with her. So after she tells me all this, I've been witnessing her. She wants to come out. I say, do you want to come out? You want to come to the present? She says yes. She comes out of that warehouse by putting rocket shoes on, and she shoots up out of this warehouse. And we get up there, because I'm still with her, and it's a desert above. And she looks around, and she certainly doesn't want to be in the desert. She says, I want a playground. Nope, I want a swing set. And for some reason, I immediately start thinking of Brer Rabbit ride at Disney World. And so she says she wants to go there. And I think, okay, this is not making any sense to me, but fine, she wants to go this Brer Rabbit ride. And that's all I can think of is the Brer Rabbit ride. I don't remember anything else about it. So she ends up settling on this swing set that's at the end of this ride. And then I'm remembering, okay, at the end of the ride, there's Brer Rabbit, and there's all these like animal cartoon looking characters, and they're singing, and there's bright colors. And she's swinging on the swing set. And I exhale. I get it. She belongs. She's a cartoon character just like these guys. And finally, she belongs. Later, I realized that this is Splash Mountain, which if you've been to Disney World, you probably knew that already, but I, for some reason, didn't remember that. But this is Splash Mountain, and Splash Mountain is a waterfall. Anyways, the waterfall is like the ground giving out, right? It's a dropping sensation. The burdened part is that triangle female cartoon part that is in the warehouse. That would be the burdened part, the part that feels like she does not belong and that she feels scared, and she's sort of having these memories of these, really huge life transitions for her 4th, 5th grade. Unburdened is the part of her that is still the cartoon character, but now she is in this Splash Mountain ride. She has a sense of belonging, and she feels really connected. She feels held and witnessed by me, by self, and she feels the unburdening, the freeing, the relief. So those are the differences between burden and unburden. I hope that kind of makes sense. You have to go listen, and I will see you at part 2. Enjoy. It's great. It's good to see your face.
Likewise, yeah. Looks like it's warm where you're at.
It is, yeah. What is it like where you are?
Yeah, it's about 75 today. I've been indoors all day, which is why I've got my kind of sweater top on.
And where are you in the world? You're in...
Yeah, I'm in Eugene, Oregon. Where are you?
I'm in New Hampshire.
Oh my gosh, okay.
Did you grow up in Oregon?
I did not, no. I've been here for about 7 years.
What made you go out there?
Well, I lived in Seattle for about, 25 years. And its growth in those 25 years, just over the years, was too much. And then by those last 5 years, it was like, I'm I need somewhere quieter. So thought a little town like Eugene that's still on the West Coast.
Why do we know Eugene, Oregon? I feel like it's a little town, but people know about it.
College town, the University of Oregon's here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is that picture behind you?
Have you ever been to Esalen?
No, I've heard all about
No.
it though.
This is the road to Esalen. It's the Bixby Bridge, which is one of the famous bridges in California.
Wow.
And it's just Highway 1 headed down from the Bay Area down to Esalen.
Wow. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Have you been there?
Yes, I go almost every year with Dick. So I've been there, I think 11. I've had 11 different workshops there with him over the years.
Wow. Was that around your first introduction to IFS?
It was, yes.
Really? Okay.
Mhm.
Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
I had been in therapy for about maybe 2 or 3 years with a Hakomi therapist. And one day she did IFS, and I said, whatever you're doing right now, this is what I need. Tell me about this. And she told me about it. I went home and I Googled it, and I found he was going to be at Esalen, and I had never heard of Esalen. And I went
Wow.
right away because it was like, I think a month and a half after I'd found out about it. Dove in, and when I came back from that, I said, okay, Carol, I'm doing this twice a week. We're just diving in.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredible.
And how many years was it? Around 11 years ago?
No, that was about 15 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, somewhere about that amount of time.
And tell me all the amazing IFS things that you've done in those 15 years.
Yeah, what have I done with IFS over the last 15 years? Well, certainly the first many years was the focus on my own work. And literally coming back from Esalen, it felt like dominoes, just, like the line of dominoes, part after part after part, just unburdening. So that was the biggest stretch of time with my use of IFS was personal use. And then diving in with my training, and then diving with the foundation. So I've just, as my system has unburdened, my parts and myself have just been like, oh yes, let's take on the world with IFS. Whatever we're called to be doing with it, let's do it. Yeah, I'm an IFS certified IFS practitioner. Also, I consider myself an alternative counselor. So in Eugene and Vermont, there's 2 states where they will allow you to practice counseling without a master's or a PhD, or without a license. As long as you have counseling skills and as long as you don't assess, diagnose, or treat mental disorders, which is totally in line with IFS. So I'm an alternative counselor. I've been through all 3 levels of trainings. I am a regular PA, and I've had over 350 hours of direct learning from Dick. He's my primary teacher.
What made you decide, so you started doing all of this therapy, the personal work on yourself, that's how you got into it. What made you switch to do it more professionally?
Good question. Well, I had always known I wanted to become a therapist. I'm not a therapist, I'm an IFS practitioner. And I think just over the course of the years with meeting so many, I would say both therapists and practitioners at SLN, and them sharing their stories of how you can actually do the work without becoming a full-on therapist, just really excited me. So it was hearing from other practitioners primarily using the model and just saying, wow, okay, I don't have to go back to school. And in addition to that, hearing from many therapists saying, oh my gosh, I've had to kind of almost unlearn a lot of stuff that I've taken in, and, the pathology of psychotherapy in general. I mean, that's a generalization, but it's one of those things where my parts really didn't want to have to go invest time and money in putting all this stuff in that I wasn't going to want to have to undo or erase.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's been my experience of I had been a therapist for, I don't know, 10, 15 years before I was introduced to IFS. And so it's definitely one of the hardest things is like, do I go back to what feels kind of normal and routine, or do I do this model? Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I didn't have that. I guess I didn't have that factor because I knew it so much from the inside as a client. Just knowing that, yeah, I wanted to keep that pure, maybe I'll strike the word pure, but that focus on, non-pathologized way of looking at how we function in the world and why.
Can we talk a little bit about, because that comes up a lot in these podcasts, what does that mean? Non-pathologized.
Right. Well, certainly most of the DSM is a pathologized way of looking at things. What's wrong with you? How are you somehow different or strange or, the ways you're impaired, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's never felt good anyway. So with IFS, it's just more of really seeing the positive intentions of our parts and the burdens, and knowing that when the burdens are released and we have our self energy, our self access there, we're all whole anyway inside underneath all of those layers of burden. So why cover it up with some label?
I'll back up because I know I just sort of jumped in, and there's a part of me that's just super nosy, and I know you a little bit, but I just started like, I had this intention of like, we're going to do a meditation together and all this stuff. But then I just got excited and wanted to like get to know you more. So that's just a part of me. So I think there's sort of the girlfriend part of me is like, let's just talk and get to know each other. I guess I want to just check inside and see like, okay, I guess I want to talk a little bit about your book and how that came to be. And maybe we can jump off from there.
Sure. Great.
Does that feel okay?
I'm happy to go wherever you want to go. So my book started not with the intention of it being a book. When I was going to Esalen one year, my therapist had seen some of the things I created, which if you have the book or if you're curious about the book, you'll see in there. She really suggested I show these different things to Dick. When I showed them to him, his jaw dropped open and he said, "Come sit down with me and tell me all about this." And essentially at that point, it was really just showing him my parts pendants, which are externalizations of my system, and the map of my parts. After talking with him, he said, "I really want you to come present at the conference." And I had not presented or given a speech in probably 25 years. And certainly I had to work with some parts around that. So, when Dick says, "Please come do something," and he sees value in it, my parts say, "How can I, pay this forward?" In preparation for the conference, I was putting together my PowerPoint, and I decided at one point, wow, this is too much material for just like this 3-hour allotment of time. And I thought, well, maybe I'll give them a little 30-page, packet to send home with them. But as I was putting together that 30-page packet, it became this book. And I had one of those shit or get off the toilet moments, pardon my French, where it's like, okay, the conference is in 6 months. This is a book. Can I get it done before then or not? I don't think the book probably would have been written if I didn't have a hard deadline like that.
Back up a little bit and tell me about the pendants and externalizing parts and what that means.
Yeah, so that was one of the very first things. I would say maybe it's actually the second thing I had done along my journey was, maybe it was the third thing I did. It came out of my daily meditations, of a way of honoring my parts. So we talk about externalizations generally when we work with clients, or when, if you're a client, your therapist or practitioner might suggest using externalizations. And they're useful in many ways. But for me, and what you'll see in the book, is a way of really honoring your system post, unburdening. I do use them with my clients along the way before unburdening happens too. But my pendants I've located about 29 parts. So there's 29 pendants. And there's also one that represents self. It's all on one long chain, and it hangs on my office, which listeners cannot see, but Tammy can see.
Yeah, like I want to see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So readers of the book will see the full collection of them in the book, and it's also on my website. So that's something that if they're not quite ready to dive into the book, they can see it on my website as well.
You want to give your website right now? I'll also put it in the show notes, but
Sure. It's www.thelistener.net, except for it's not an ER for listener, it's a 3R. So THELISTEN 3R.net.
what's the name of your book?
Good. Daily Parts Meditation Practice, a journey of embodied integration for clients and therapists.
When I first get to know a part, like yesterday, I was in therapy and I started talking about a part that I don't really know. I just know I have a tendency to talk fast, move fast, think fast, go 100 miles an hour. So I was bringing some curiosity to that, and then an image came to mind, and then that image shifted through. We were able to do an unburdening. It was really beautiful, and it shifted a little bit, but it was sort of this ended up being this sort of cartoon character looking thing. And so would I externalize that? Like, so I wrote about it after, and then I kind of drew it. I'm really good. Like, I have a lot of imagery with my parts. And so almost immediately I'll get some sort of image. And usually it will stay even through the unburdening process. That image will stay there.
Mm-hmm.
So is that what I would externalize?
I would really encourage you to check with the part and ask them what they would like. That's my
Okay.
preference. And I take that from Dick when he talks about really honoring parts and letting them name themselves. I'm just taking it a step further and just really honoring what they would like for their object or image. This part of you may very well say, yeah, this is how I look or who I am. Please, replicate that or find it, because how hard that can sometimes be when we have these internal images of our parts, and how do we capture it in a way that really reflects them. But your part may say, you know what, actually, I want you to find this image or object or something.
That's a great idea. I've done that too before where like I have this image in my head and then I'm like looking on Google Images and I'm like, I can't
Yes.
find it. I can't like
I had the same
nothing
problem.
actually.
I'll say for listeners, one really good source for when especially if you're not a great artist, like I cannot draw stick figures to save my life. So I would be really at a stretch to do anything further than that, is Etsy.com. If you can somehow describe it or find a couple images that like loosely categorize what you're wanting and say, look for an artist on Etsy, they can often create something you want. Many of my pendants came from Etsy, specifically made for my part because I couldn't find something exactly like what you just said.
The other thing is about naming your parts. So this really stuck out to me. A part usually will start with, this part was a part that felt like she doesn't have a place. And so, first of all, that's a mouthful, the part that doesn't feel like she has a place.
Yes.
And then it's sort of that's how a descriptor of her, but that's not her name. And so talk a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about your ideas around how you ask parts, how you name parts.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a really big proponent of certainly really letting your parts name themselves. So, like you said, sometimes it is a long mouthful of what they do or what their burden is, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I was going to give you an example. Like some of my parts in the early days, one was called "It's Better Than Nothing," and the other one was "No, it's not better than nothing." It's like that's certainly their mottos, but that's not who they are, right? And so when I
Yeah.
look at or encourage clients to name their parts, is I really focus on the difference between who they are versus their natural qualities or gifts, right? So we can look at it as far as moving from the burdened beliefs or roles that they have to their natural roles. And along the way, we may just acknowledge to our parts, we're calling you this name. Is that okay? Maybe they're like, yeah, that's fine for now. Or they may say, please call me this. But I like to think of it as a placeholder until they're unburdened, really, because sometimes they can't even themselves think about how their life is different without those burdens. But in my work with my clients, when we go through the unburdening process, right after the unburdening is done, I often ask them, what does part want to be called now, or what is their name? And I would say probably about 80% of the time, the name is right there. The part is just like, boom. And the other I'd say 15 to 20% of the time, it has to think about it for a little bit, but it will come. And then in only 5% of the cases, they're like, the part's going to think about it till next session. And I don't know if you want some examples. I like to give examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a client that I had that one of his exiles was called the terror part. And he was bullied. And so it fit that he was the terror part going through the journey. But when he unburdened, he became the social navigator. And I find this often. It's either almost a 180, like a night and day shift for the part, or it's something very related to their innate qualities that they brought back in, right? So another one was the judge, who was very critical of others and this client's herself. But after she unburdened, it became the pearls of wisdom, who just were always tossing about just pearls of wisdom to the parts inside and out. So when we can really slow down and really honor who our parts are, I mean, it really speaks to their, one little aspect of you, like it's their identity once they've healed, right? Or it just speaks to the uniqueness of them.
I love that. That's part of the hope merchanting.
Yeah.
Is that this part in its burdened role, we don't like it and it doesn't like that role either, but that it's in its unburdened role, it can be an amazing part of our system. It can actually really provide something that our system needs.
Right. Right. And that speaks to one of the benefits, I believe, of having a daily meditation practice. But I'll just speak briefly about, when we're in connection with our parts regularly, they'll bring, you'll both know and have a regular connection with that unique quality or essence that the part brings to your life. It can be a really, really beautiful interplay between self and the parts, what they bring to our life.
Let's talk about this daily meditation practice and the steps. How does that sound?
Before doing that, if it's okay, just to let listeners know that there are 6 different tools in there, and maybe I'll just list them first and then we can go to the meditation.
Perfect.
Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Even though the book is called Daily Parts Meditation Practice, there are 6 tools, and they are the parts timelines, parts mapping, parts catalog cards, parts biographies. They all start with parts. Parts externalizations, and a daily parts meditation practice, which is the actual meditation with your parts.
We use the word parts a lot. Sometimes I am in session, I'll think, okay, use a different word. There's a part of me that's like, oh my gosh, stop saying part.
Exactly, right. I know, it does become a little, yeah.
So one of the things that I want to say is that your parts mapping, one of the things, I took your workshop 2 years ago at the annual conference, and one of the things that you said was one of the best gifts you can give someone is when you're watching a demo, or even when you're sitting with a client, mapping out their parts. And I've done that several times, and I think that it helps. Probably a manager for me really likes doing that. It helps me track. That's just been a tool that I've used, and I've done that when I was a program assistant. I would do that for people during the demos, and yeah, so that was a huge takeaway for me.
Great. And what were their responses when you gave them their maps?
They were thrilled, and then the part of me that felt so good, like, you know what I mean? But yes, they were very thrilled because you're not tracking that stuff when you're doing a demo or when you're inside. you're not tracking that. And so a lot happens. And I think they were very appreciative.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I found that too within all my different trainings or workshops I've done. When I've given the demo person their map, they were really excited to have something to bring home and then look at the relationships and then take that further with their next sessions.
Exactly, because I've done a couple demos and I would journal after, but it's like I would have loved to have more information because then I could have gotten to know all the parts that came up, and yeah, it would have taken the work a little bit deeper, I think.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It does really appease the either the analytical parts or the thinking parts, the ones that kind of like to put things together or do something, right? I don't, well, I would say very seldom do I do a map during the session. I do them after. But when I'm watching a demo, I certainly do that. And that's a great time to practice using it.
Well, so I kind of got you off on the maps, but that's not the first part isn't the map though. The first part is the listing.
We're on the same page. I was just going to
Okay.
go there.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so the first tool that I have in my book is the parts timelines. And it's essentially just a listing of the parts that come up during a session. So I just keep a running tab of that. So I'll have a sheet of paper with the date and then list parts names that come up pretty much in order for my clients. And then next session comes, next date, the next list of parts that come up. And you can use parts timelines for a number of things, but they're most helpful in recreating or creating that parts map. But the other thing is you can just at a glance see how active certain parts are, or when another part comes in and you go, oh yeah, every time, so and so comes in, this one also comes in, but never when these ones come in, right? And of course, as we're getting to know the parts, we get to know why that is. But sometimes it's just helpful to see over time. I found it personally helpful for my own system to kind of notice that. But then with my own clients, it is helpful just to kind of have a quick view of who is like frequent guests. I mean, you kind of already know that anyway, but for some reason, maybe it's for one of those analytical parts just to go, yeah, this is kind of fun to keep tabs on. But also, it's a great place to highlight. I use an orange highlighter for when a client has unburdened, and I'll just highlight their name in that timeline, so you can kind of track the flow of unburdenings or who's unburdened. At that point, the name will have been written there. Maybe it's the no, it's not better than part, and then it's then renamed. So I just cross that out and then write it on top just to kind of keep that flow going. That's the parts timelines. And I think that of all the tools, that's probably one of the least, I would say, least helpful for clients themselves, maybe, unless they want to take it further with doing their own mapping and stuff. But that's one of the things I do with my clients anyway, is they get a map. But if you've got clients doing their own inner work between sessions and kind of trying to integrate stuff between, then that would be super helpful for them.
Well, and I think the other thing that's helpful with them, and for me, is to notice that parts, like if we were having a conversation and you were tracking parts, that like I would be like, oh, there were 10 parts. I wasn't even aware that there were 10 different parts that were active. And I think that alone would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah. It depends on the client and the system, but sometimes I can see how I've got one client in particular where there's I would say a smaller number of parts that come up in session, generally speaking, but as her system has unburdened, more of them have been named towards the end. Like when the integration piece of the work is done, we bring back in all the parts to see how this unburdened part is doing now. And then we'll have kind of a whole listing of other parts to come in to see that. So you can kind of see this transformation of a growing set of parts coming in as healing progresses. But then on the flip side, I've had a couple clients where their systems just have a lot of parts just always active, right? I mean, sometimes it's probably 10 or 15 parts. And as their system has healed, it's become less number of parts that become active during a session. So I would say it just depends on the system itself, but you can kind of track, I think that kind of speaks a little bit to the integration of the parts who are seeing what's happening along the way.
Right. Even if it's like self is working with this one part, all the other parts are seeing that and relaxing and softening. And like I have a really angry part, and my part often goes with eating all the sugar part so that we don't feel angry. So those two parts are like friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if the angry part was to become unburdened, then eating too much sugar part might not need to be as active.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we're kind of speaking a little bit to one of the benefits of the maps, which we use the parts timelines to make, of course. But when you can start to see the relationships of the parts visually represented on a map, and you get to see those relationships. In your example, yeah, that sugar eating part may be just totally happy after the other one's good, but that part may say, well, that's good, I'm less active, but you know what, you have to deal with this one over here too. And you can see that listed very clearly on the map. I'll just say how I came up with this map template itself was a process. I had tried to create the traditional mandala where we've got the firefighters, exiles, and managers nicely laid out that way. But the regions were too small to add in all the parts. So what I created was a concentric circle. So anybody listening to this can do it very easily by just taking a piece of paper and drawing a circle in the center of a piece of paper, and then a larger one encompassing that one. So what I generally say is that on the inside of the circle is the exiles, and they're protected by two layers of protectors, right? We've got managers and firefighters. So in that next ring, or that larger circle, is where I place the managers. And then in the outer area that doesn't have a circle around it, because firefighters often just bust through any boundaries and barriers anyway, they're on the outer edge of the paper. That's for me, that felt right, not only because the exiles are protected by two layers of protection, but because the firefighters didn't have, aside from the actual sheet of paper, they didn't have a boundary, right? The white space is self, so self is all inclusive, it's everywhere. And so we don't necessarily need to draw self, it's just holds everybody. But within that, we will, place a circle for a part. Say it's an exile, we'll place a little tiny circle in the center and put the part's name on it. Then if you've got your manager, you'll place that in the manager ring. And because they're connected, you'll draw a little spoke on each of the circles to connect them and put each other's names on there. And over time, I'll just say you can create session-only maps, which is something you spoke about when watching a demo, or just for one client session, is capturing all the parts in just that one session and linking the relationships of, who came after who, right? Or who jumped in because of somebody else. You'll link them because you know how they're interacting with one another. But then you can take that first session map and create what I'm calling the full system map. So you just keep adding to this session after session, which becomes really easy if you're following the thread, because the same parts are coming up. Maybe you get a new one coming in, and the next, after the next session, you're just adding maybe one or two more circles to it, a couple of spokes. Might learn of some polarizations and alliances and such, and you can just add those. I like to put a P for polarization and an A for alliance, and at a glance, you can see some qualities of relationships with that. I'll just say that I will give all my clients their first map, and then I will either wait for them to ask for what does it look like now, or if it feels like it's been a while and it feels somehow appropriate that they might want to take a look at it, then I'll send them another one. But I often let it be client led after that point. And I have no expectations whether they like it or not, or if they use it or not. But some of them like to, like you said, just have it represented and go, wow, I didn't realize there were all these parts because we just worked on mainly on this one or these two. Yeah, clients find them to be generally helpful, but I let it be client led as far as do they want it updated more. Some of them do them on their own.
Yeah, I was thinking of the benefit, and this will get us into the meditation, which I know we're not at that point yet, but I was thinking of the benefit of having it all written down and having, even if it's a couple pieces of paper, of like, here's my system. And that feels, I don't know, that feels very like containing, or I don't know, it feels really good that I could be able to see, once you've been doing this for a couple of years, there are parts that I don't even remember about, or, parts that were like huge and taken over my life that I don't even know who they are, or you know what I mean? And I remember when I got your book, and I think I was preparing to come to the conference, and I sat down and did the cards.
Great.
And I probably spent a couple hours doing these catalog cards. And I remember just as I was doing them, I just kept feeling like, oh, I forgot about, like I was going through my old journals. So that's one of the things that you say is go through your old journals, if you've been doing this for a while. And that's what I did. I went through all of my old, like, I saw Dick at Cape Cod. That was my first introduction to IFS. Mm-hmm. So I did Cape Cod, and I've done a couple workshops in level 1 and all that good stuff. But yeah, and I just sat down with all my journals and ended up writing all of these cards out. And I was like, I had so many that I had completely forgotten. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like visiting old friends, right? I was like, oh yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah, I want a system that I'm touching base with these guys a little more than I do, instead of only touching base with whoever's having an emergency, that I'm touching base with all of them all the time. Because I think I would be I'd have more self, or there would be more self energy around if I had a regular practice of just connecting with even some of the old timers.
Right. The old timers, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that speaks to a number of things, but one of them, what you said at the beginning of this piece here, was having your full system kind of mapped out. I know, at least for my parts, it was so nice for them to know, yeah, I'm there. It's almost like a literal map. They're like, yes, I'm included. And so is my buddy over here, and the one I used to hate that's over there. And it's something where when I look at it, I know that, like, certainly if I blend in with different parts, it feels calming to know, yeah, I'm included. It's kind of that, I always say it's another means of no parts left behind, of really, yeah, you belong in the system. Here you are, right?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I wonder if it's like we were talking about earlier, if the other parts that aren't unburdened yet, it gives them hope.
Yes. Yes, definitely. I've certainly seen that with clients, and recently was PAing up in Portland, and they showed the video that a lot of people who've been through trainings have seen of Bob Falconer's unburdening, and how we don't buy, I wouldn't say his part was bypassed, but protectors often are asked so many times to step back, right? And give space, and we heal all these exiles. But when they finally get their turn, they're like, yeah, I've been watching all these guys, right? And it's giving me hope, but yeah, I want to be on there too, or I want my pendant or my externalization too. It does give them that hope.
Yeah. What could happen too is they might say, I need some attention. And so then they might activate your system in some way, because they're like, it's my turn. And if you're not listening to me, then I'm going to get your attention somehow.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to get louder somehow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say not, you would talk about the old timers, the parts that you've unburdened, and it's been a while since you've connected. They may also create ways in which to get your attention, not necessarily from their old burdened places, but like, hey, Tammy, remember me? It's been a long time. Can we have a talk?
Mm.
And they may, find some way to make that happen. So, yeah.
Mm. And as you're saying that, I'm just letting them know that I'm open to that.
Yeah.
So I just said, okay, I would like that. If anybody needs some attention, I'm open to what they need.
Great. Yeah.
That feels good.
I was just going to ask you, how's it feeling?
I
How's it feel
know.
inside for
It
your
feels
parts to hear
really
that?
good. Yeah, it feels really good. My body just softened a little bit. I was like, oh, that feels good. After the map, and is that when we do the cards,
Um,
or is it different? The cards and
Essentially,
the biographies are different, right?
yeah, they're different. And essentially, these can all be done at any point, really.
Okay. I think there was a part of me that was like, is it like one, two, like, a
Yeah.
sequence? Okay.
Yeah, it's not. I just for simplicity, when I was doing my PowerPoint and then creating this book, I put them in this order, mostly because, they go together. Certain things go together. The maps and the timelines go together. The parts catalog cards and the biographies go together, and the externalization is pretty much independent, although you can definitely use the meditation to get in touch with your parts around what they want for their externalization. So regardless of how it's listed or laid out in the book, they're definitely used whenever you want to, or in whichever order you want to. But since we're going sequentially in our talk here, the next one we would cover would be the PCCs, or the parts catalog cards.
All right, let's do it. Tell me about the cards.
Yeah, and that's when I spoke earlier about the first thing I did. That was the actual first thing I did. And one of my managers in therapy would not really step back unless I recorded my sessions. Anytime a part would unburden, she would be very insistent that I would write down some key things from that. And so I would have these little index cards in my little journals of when a part unburdened. And so this is how these parts catalogs cards came about. For me, essential pieces of an unburdening are where the parts were retrieved to, right? What they unburdened and how, what qualities or energies they brought back in, what their new role, or their old and their new roles are. And then I like to, because most of us are visual, there's, maybe 10 or 15% of people who don't see things inside, which is fine. But for those of us who are visual, I like to write down the imagery that comes during them. And you spoke earlier about, yeah, this part of me kind of looks like this cartoon character, and it's been pretty much the same throughout. So you'd want to kind of write that down or capture that. But of course, when we look at the unburdenings, you might want to write down whether it was which of the elements, light, fire, water, earth, wind, or anything else, right? There might be something really important that the part had that released out of its body that you want to capture as well, or different things that come back in. And I would say, of all these tools, aside from the meditation, the parts catalog cards are probably my clients' favorites, partly because on the back side of these cards, which I didn't do for my own system going through my healing. Well, I guess I did in a roundabout way from journaling, but I started doing this as a practitioner, is as I'm listening to my clients' parts and their burdens and their history, I will, on the back side of the parts catalog card, write down the burdens I'm hearing or key memories. And then
I
once they've
love
been,
that. That's great.
yeah, and then on the front side to capture the unburdening. So they've got this pre and post on one or two pieces of paper, depending on how much witnessing we do, that's on the back sides. And I think that's one of the things I think clients like the most. I think it's really their parts that like it the most, right? It's like, here's my what would we call it? My official history, right? My logbook or whatever. You've really captured it. So
it's funny because I remember when I started doing them, I think I started writing where they were retrieved from, like the scene they were retrieved from, and the scene they were retrieved, or where they ended up, where they came to the present, because it was
great.
like, here's like this trauma memory that I have. And I felt like it was important to me to kind of link what was the part up to begin with, sort of the part of you that needs to talk fast, and then the link to the memory, the exiled memory, and then I don't know. There just felt like I needed to link. I needed to link
That's great.
the actual memory to, where they ended up.
That's great. Yeah, and I really like that idea. I've always captured it just on the back, but I like having it on the front. It's kind of like in the role place. I will put the old role with the new role, and that goes just hand in hand of just putting down, yep, where that critical memory was, where they were retrieved from, and then where they are now. I
I
really
love
like
that.
that.
I love that. Yeah.
Oh yes, this is an important piece, I think, of the parts catalog cards is often when a part has unburdened, like you were saying, you've got these old timers you haven't connected to for a while. Sometimes I'm working with a client and they will say, or typically it's like an analyzing part or a thinking part going, haven't we already dealt with a part like this? And it's like, yeah, that sounds like a very common burden, or one that we've worked with. So we can look through these cards at some point, not necessarily right there in the session, but I encourage that between to see if there are common burdens. And most people do have a theme. But sometimes I've had a part say, I'm just wondering if that burden has come back. So what we'll do is we'll just do a little inner work. We'll connect with the part, and I will sometimes read back their parts card, and they'll be like, yeah, it's all good still, that's all still gone. And yep, I still have all these qualities. So that's been really helpful for a number of my clients where they will actually ask me to, and sometimes this comes up right before the unburdening where we'll say, ask the part, did you think, client Jane has got it all? And they'll say yes. And sometimes they'll say, but can you read my parts card? Because they really like, I think the parts themselves really like to know that I'm listening and the self is listening and the client. And sometimes they're moved by tears like, wow, you've really, really got me. And sometimes verbatim. So I think that's also another really helpful thing about the parts cards.
Well, it reminds me of that idea of your being the self, like you as the practitioner, you as the therapist are being the self to the client's parts often. So you're holding them, you're seeing them, you're validating them, and that's the experience. So that feels so good because you're being the self in that moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And, often I wouldn't have necessarily had to have read their parts cards to kind of reflect back what I do know and get about them.
Yeah.
But it is helpful for some of them. I would say maybe this is just a wild ballpark, but I'm guessing it's mostly the really young parts that really like to hear it back, not necessarily the older parts or the protectors, but really the young ones are like, wow, you really listened to me. Like sometimes you'd have the same words I used.
Oh, yeah. That's so important. Yeah, that's been important for me too. If I say I felt embarrassed, and then whoever the therapist that I'm talking to or whatever is like, so you felt really scared or whatever. I'm like, no, I felt embarrassed.
Right.
I mean, how many times in our lives have other people told us what we're supposed to feel?
Right.
Or, yeah,
And not hear us, right?
that's right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so from the parts catalog cards, we can, if we want to, with especially people who are writers, expand those into biographies. I like to think of them as each part's own biography written by self. I would say, generally speaking, we probably wouldn't want another part writing the biography of others, especially if they're still burdened. But when self does it, it's a really lovely way to capture really the essence of the part. It can be as, simple as a small paragraph or two, or it could be a whole chapter, or it could be a book. The sky is really the limit when you're writing about a part. And their healing path, their whole history. Like, it's literally, like Dick says, these are our inner children. They're all each unique. And if you take one part, you take their parts catalog cards, and you see, you could literally probably write a whole book just on one part itself. Of course, all the other parts will be linked in because they're friends or neighbors, right, or whatever you want to call them.
Gang members. They're gang
members. Yeah, right. But you could also, I could see, I have not yet done this, but a part could write their own autobiography.
Yeah. I was thinking that.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
And I'll just say I'm in the middle of writing my memoir finally. I know I mentioned it in my book that it's been on and off the table, but it's definitely on the table again, and been carving out dedicated time. And a piece of that is it will have my parts' biographies in there, but it's a flow of my own IFS healing work of unburdening a full system through IFS.
When can we expect that to be out?
So a part of me said, don't mention that we're doing the book because we don't know when it's going to be out, and we don't want people asking.
Sorry.
It's totally okay.
It's coming from the part of me that just can't wait to read it. I loved your book, and I hope you know that. I loved your book, and I know that you have a fascinating story. And so that's part of my excited parts. Like, yes, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, I hear you. And I've got, my whole system is so excited about getting the book done. But the part that just had hesitancy about broadcasting this, has this now says, are we going to have extra pressure? And I just let her know, it'll still happen in its own timing. So the answer to that is, I don't know yet. It's a completely different process writing the memoir than it has been to write this unexpected parts, daily parts meditation practice. So there are parts of me that would love to have a 2020, 2020 stamp inside, but we'll see if we get that far. It might be 2021.
And do you think I think you self-published this one. Do you think you'll self-publish the next one?
No, I'm hoping to have a publisher with that one. I'd like to have a broader reach. Parts of me definitely have this vision of, they would love to see it become a movie. Yeah.
Wow.
To really capture really that hope merchanting, right? The real essence of IFS, not just a part or two, but a full system.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.